I'm very high on Josh Paschal. I've been high on Josh Paschal since they drafted him last year, and I think he, you know, to Mark's point about James Houston being a little slept on based on his production, I feel like people are sleeping on Josh Paschal, considering the fact that like he was a second round pick, which means that they thought very highly of him, and I think they have a plan carved out for him. And I think this upcoming season, we're really going to see that kind of come to life through camp and once the season starts. So let's actually jump into. I said I was going to start with Houston, but let's go ahead and start with Josh Paschal first because that's kind of where we're talking right now. So Josh Paschal last year had 4 starts, which were his first 4 games after he came back from injury. He was getting those starts. When he was starting, because I want to give like I actually broke down what his snap count was when he was starting versus what it was, you know, last 5 games of the season. So his first 4 starts, he got 195 total snaps. 82 of those were run defense snaps, and 113 of those were pass rush snaps. Right, so they were using him frequently in those first few matchups that he was in. Now, after that, you started to see some guys come back. Charles Harris came back. Uh, John Cominsky was getting more snaps. Julian was still there, and so those snap counts started to diminish quite quickly as they started to kind of. I feel like they started to spread that love a little bit and not try to put so much on the rookie's plate at that time. And so the last 5 games that Josh played, he went down to 83 total snaps. 34 of those were against the run, and 49 of those were pass rush snaps. So again, still being heavily used in pass rush situations, um, and sprinkled in here and there on rundowns. Um, if you actually go to PFF, if you have a PFF account, you can actually like see how it broke down as far as like where he was lining up. And I know a lot of us have talked about the fact that like, hey, Josh can kick inside and play, D tackle, or he can play nose or whatever the case may be. Well, when you look at his snap count breakdown, he lines a lot at edge. Like they did line him up in the middle, but primarily he was on the outside. They were lining him up on the edge frequently to again, I think that's where they want him. And I think so going back to Ward's point, I think he's going to go into training camp with every opportunity to earn that edge 2 spot opposite Hutch. And if he were to come out getting it, I know I would be ecstatic because I think from a running, from a rundown perspective, just being able to defend the run, I think Josh is head and shoulders better than everybody else on this list, right? Just as far as physical talent goes. He obviously needs to learn the game, and that's where Romeo and Charles Harris and John Kaminsky have an edge over him in just experience. But I think as far as like physical traits and what he can actually do in that position, I think if Josh can continue to add to his skill set, he will become the best option to start opposite Hutch if we're specifically looking at a run stuffer and you're looking at somebody too that you want to have out there on first and second down and on these short yardage situations, somebody that you want to be able to seal an edge. I think that's what Josh Paschal probably does better than any of these other edge players. The next one though on this list is James Houston, right? Is the guy that we're talking about is probably being overlooked. James is by far, and this includes Hutch, in my opinion, James Houston is by far the most natural pass rusher the Lions have. He is the most just natural bend, quickness. I think from a skill set and just how he approaches rushing the passer, I think he just does it at a better level. If James Houston was 6'3" to 6'5", if he had Hutch's height with everything else he has, we would have been talking about James Houston as a first round pick, as like a number one overall pick last year, because that's how natural his bend and his usage of pass rush moves is. And so when we look at James, he did have 2 starts. He started the last 2 games for the Lions against Chicago and against Green Bay. In those 5 games that he played, he had 123 total snaps played. 30 of those were run defense snaps, but 93 of those were pass rush opportunities. And so it kind of shines a light on the fact of when Kelvin Shepard talks about like them going into this offseason and James has to be able to prove that he can do more than just rush the passer. This is why, right? They only used him 30 times right? 30 snaps to defend the run, which isn't a lot, but they heavily relied upon him on these pass rush opportunities. So, in to my guy Mark's point about, hey, if he at least gets 25 snaps, he can probably get 18, sacks. I do think that's where his role is more so going to be. I don't know if he's going to necessarily beat out some of these other guys unless he takes a big step forward in being able to defend the run, right? But if even if he doesn't do that, what he has shown that he is very capable of doing is you get teams in second and long, third and long situations, you can absolutely trot James Houston out there and at least feel confident that he's going to get a pressure, that he's going to rush the quarterback in and hurry up their process, if not get a sack every opportunity he has at getting on the field. Again, I can't remember. I didn't write it down, but if I'm trying to go off the top of my head, of these, edge rushers, I believe James Houston also had the most pressures. He had the most hurries, um, and I believe he also had the most hits. If it wasn't him, Josh Pascal also had like second most, right, as far as like pressures and hurries of these guys. And so the younger guys that the Lions have at the edge spot were very, very effective. And so this is why I think if the Lions aren't going to be stubborn, if they're not going to just go with this whole mentality of like, well, we're just going to start our veterans, this is where I think you could really get a really nice tandem of Pascal starting first and second down, Houston rotating with Pascal, and Pascal possibly kicking inside to give interior pass rush opportunities so that you basically have, Pascal in the middle, Hutch on one side, um, Houston on the other side, and you can either throw Kamish in the middle, and you can use honestly Romeo or Charles Harris as an additional linebacker and have them rush as well. Like there are so many opportunities for these guys. And another thing that kind of gives James Houston um a boost and grit is kind of saying it like right now, right? James Justin Fields is still having nightmares about James Houston. Is that James Houston does give you that, right? If you're talking about going into a matchup where you have a mobile quarterback and you need an edge rusher that you want to do more than just set the edge, but actually be able to chase down a mobile quarterback, this is where James Houston is going to be very effective. This is where Josh Pascal, I think, is also very effective versus the likes of a Romeo or a Charles Harris. Julian is also very effective in this way. These guys are just a little more nimble, and it probably has a lot to do with the youth factor, right? They're younger and they just have that nimbleness to be able to stay with these mobile quarterbacks a little bit better.